A very good afternoon and thank you for joining us on BTV Global News at 12. I am Ruth Obodo and now the news in detail. Democratic candidate Kristen Menefee has won a special election for the U.S. House of Representatives in Texas, filling the long vacant 18th congressional district seat and narrowing the Republican majority in the House. The report.
Menefee, the former Harris County attorney, secured victory in a runoff against fellow Democrat Amanda Edwards in the heavily Democratic Houston district on January 31, 2026. His win reduces the Republican margin in the House to 218 to 214, tightening an already narrow GOP majority. At his election night celebration, Menefee laid out a combative agenda aimed at reversing key policies of President Donald Trump administration, particularly on immigration. He pledged to push for major changes to the U.S. Immigration and Custom Enforcement (ICE), saying he would work to tear ICE up from the roots, a phrase he used to emphasize the event to overhaul what he described as aggressive immigration enforcement. Menefee also said he would seek the impeachment of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem over ICE operations and broader immigration policy, framing the election result as a mandate for resistance to the current administration's agenda. He told supporters the victory signals a need to fight back against where the country is being taken under Trump. The seat Menefee will feel had been empty for nearly a year after the death of longtime Democratic Rep Sylvester Turner in March 2025. Voter turnout in the runoff was relatively low, a factor common in special elections, but Menefee's decisive margin reflected strong backing in the historic districts. In addition to immigration, Menefee campaigned on expanding healthcare access, increasing the minimum wage, and supporting minority and women-owned businesses' positions that align with progressive priorities in his district. Political analysts say the win boosts Democratic morale ahead of the 2026 midterm election, signaling potential shifts in voter sentiment in traditionally Republican states and offering momentum for the party's broader goals nationwide. Evelyn Izibli reporting for BTV News.
U.S. President Donald Trump has said he has ordered the Department of Homeland Security to stay out of protests taking place in Democratic-led cities unless state or local authorities formally request federal assistance or federal property is under direct threat. The report.
Trump made the statement while addressing concerns over federal involvement in local law enforcement matters, stressing that DHS should not intervene in demonstrations simply because of unrest at a city or state level. According to him, federal agencies should only step in when there is a clear risk to federal buildings, personnel, or assets, or when governors or mayors explicitly ask for support. He stated that under no circumstances should DHS insert itself into protests in cities governed by democratic administrations without meeting those conditions. Trump argued that law enforcement responsibility during protests should primarily remain with state and local authorities, except in situations that directly affect federal interests. The directive comes amid ongoing debate in the United States over the role of federal security agencies in managing protests, particularly following past incidents where federal officers were deployed to cities experiencing large-scale demonstrations. Those deployments drew sharp criticism from Democratic leaders who accused the federal government of overreach, while supporters argued they were necessary to protect federal property and maintain order. DHS has not released a separate public statement detailing how the directive would be implemented operationally. However, the Guardian signaled a more restraining federal posture towards protests in democratic-led jurisdiction, placing emphasis on local control control unless federal involvement is clearly justified. The issue continues to highlight the deep political division over policing, protest management, and the balance of power between federal and local authorities in the United States. Evelyn Isabella reporting for BTV News.
Iran's top leadership issued a stark warning on Sunday that a U.S. military attack on the Islamic Republic would not be confined to its own borders and could quickly escalate into a broader regional conflict. At the same time, Tehran took the unusual diplomatic step of designating the armies of European Union countries as terrorist groups in retaliation for recent actions by the EU. The report.
Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei made the comments in remarks carried on Iranian state media describing Washington's threat of military actions as highly dangerous. He stressed that Iran does not seek to initiate war but will respond strongly if attacked. Khamenei's remark underscored the risk that any conflict between Tehran and Washington could spread across Middle East, drawing in neighboring countries and regional powers. State media quoted the supreme leader saying Iranians should not be scared of U.S. threats, reaffirming that Iran should defend its territory and interests if confronted with external aggression. Analysis suggests that Tehran views such rhetoric as both a deterrent and a message to regional actors about the wider consequences of renewed military confrontation. Tension between the United States and Iran have soared in recent weeks amid a buildup of U.S. naval forces in the Middle East, including the deployment of the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln and accompanying warships. U.S. President Donald Trump have repeatedly warned of possible military intervention if Tehran fails to make concessions on its nuclear program and end its suppression of domestic protests. Despite this, U.S. officials have also signaled a willingness to re-engage in diplomatic talks. Iran have firmly rejected any notion of surrender, insisting it will not back down on what it views as its sovereign rights and security. The country's leadership has also sought to portray internal protests, which began over economic conditions and grew into a broader anti-government movement, as externally fomented unrest that threatened national stability. In a symbolic rebuttal to Western pressure, Iran's parliament speaker Mohammad Bagher Khalibaf announced that the Islamic Republic now considers the militaries of European Union members to be terrorist groups. This step came in response to the EU's recent decision to designate Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization, citing the Guard's role in violent crackdown on protests and human rights abuses. During a parliament session in Tehran, lawmakers wearing IRGC uniforms voiced support for the elite force and expressed outrage at what they describe as an irresponsible move by Brussels. Khalibaf invoked Iran's domestic law allowing reciprocal designation, but analysts note that the decision is largely symbolic and unlikely to produce immediate legal effect on the ground. Iran's government have also discussed the possibility of expelling EU military attaches from Tehran and is considering further diplomatic countermeasures amid deepening rifts with Western capitals. Regional and international regional allies such as Turkey have urged de-escalation and diplomacy, even as governments across the Middle East express concern about the possibility of a wider conflict. Some Gulf states are wary of being drawn into a confrontation that could disrupt global oil markets and heighten security risk. Despite heightened rhetoric, both Tehran and Washington have indicated an openness to dialogue on key issues, including nuclear negotiations, although trust remains fragile. Hospitals, markets, and other civilian areas with gunfire, suicide bombings, and improvised explosives. According to the Balochistan Chief Minister, Safrax Bokti, security forces responded swiftly to the attacks, engaging the militants over nearly 2 days. The operation resulted in the death of 145 militants, marking one of the highest militant casualty figures in such a short span in the province's long-running insurgency. The initial militant offensive left nearly 50 people dead, including 17 law enforcement personnel and 31 civilians, with others wounded. Authorities said that some attackers disguised themselves as civilians and used civilians as shield in an attempt to reach strategic targets. The band BLA claimed responsibility for the coordinated offensive, describing it as a planned operation against state forces. Pakistan's military accused the militants of being supported by foreign actors, a claim denied by neighboring countries. In the aftermath, security operation continued as forces combed affected areas to detain suspects, secure damaged infrastructure, prevent further violence. Hospitals in the region were placed on emergency alert to treat the wounded, and movement restrictions were imposed in some districts as authorities worked to stabilize the situation. Favor Kolawole reporting for BTV News.
Israel has announced that Gaza's main border crossing at Rafah, linking the Palestinian enclave with Egypt, is expected to reopen on Monday, marking a significant development after the crossing remained largely shut for nearly 2 years amid the war in Gaza. The report.
Israeli officials said preparations were underway at the heavily damaged crossing to allow the resumption of movements by Palestinians following coordination with Egypt and international partners. The reopening is expected to begin as a limited basis, focusing primarily on pedestrians crossing rather than commercial traffic. According to Israeli authorities, the initial phase will prioritize humanitarian cases, including Palestinians in need of urgent medical treatment outside Gaza, as well as limited categories of travelers approved through security screening. The crossing will not immediately resume full operations for goods or large-scale movements of people. The Rafah crossing, Gaza's only gateway not directly controlled by Israel, was effectively closed after Israeli forces moved into the Rafah area in May 2024, citing security concerns. Since then, movement through the crossing has been sporadic and tightly restricted, worsening Gaza's humanitarian crisis and cutting off many residents from medical care, education, and family reunification abroad. Officials said the reopening would involve strict security procedures with Israeli oversight remaining a key condition. Egyptian authorities are expected to manage operations on their side of the border, while international monitors may assist in facilitating the process. The move comes amid fragile ceasefire arrangements and ongoing diplomatic efforts involving regional and international actors aimed at easing humanitarian conditions in Gaza. Aid agencies have repeatedly called for the reopening of Rafah, describing it as critical for alleviating shortage and allowing the evacuation of the sick and wounded. Despite the announcement, uncertainty remains over how many people will be allowed to cross daily and whether the reopening will be sustained or expanded in the coming weeks. Israeli officials said further steps would depend on security development on the ground. Gaza has been left devastated by months of fighting, with much of its infrastructure damaged or destroyed. While the reopening of Rafah crossing is seen as a symbolic and practical step toward easing isolation, humanitarian groups warn that limited access will fall short of addressing the scale of needs inside the enclave. Favor Kolawole reporting for BTV News.
A federal judge has ordered the release of 5-year-old Liam Conejo Ramos and his father, Adrian Conejo Arias, after they were detained by U.S. Immigration and Custom Enforcement officials during a raid in a Minneapolis suburb earlier this month. The report.
Were taken into custody on January 20th, 2026 after immigration officers approached them in the driveway of their home in Columbia Heights, Minnesota when Liam was returning from preschool. The detention drew national attention after a photo of Liam wearing a blue bunny hat and a Spider-Man backpack circulated widely online. U.S. District Judge Fred Bree of the Western District of Texas issued the ruling, sharply criticizing federal immigration enforcement practices. In his order, he condemned the use of administrative warrants and the pursuit of deportation quotas, saying the government's handling of the case risked traumatizing children. Berry's opinion argued that continuing to hold the boy and his father in detention was unjustified and that constitutional protections required their release. Liam and his father were being held at the South Texas Family Residential Center in Diley, Texas, a facility for immigrant families, hundreds of miles from Minnesota. The judge instructed that they be released as soon as practicable and no later than early February as this ongoing immigration case proceeds through the court. Following the court order, Representative Jacqueline Castro, a Democrat from Texas, personally escorted the father and son back to Minnesota. They arrived home safely where community members and school officials welcomed their return. The family's detention occurred amid broader federal immigration enforcement efforts in the Twin Cities area. Lawmakers and immigrants' rights advocates have criticized ICE's actions, calling for the reforms to how immigration raids are conducted and questioned the treatment of minors in enforcement operations. The Department of Homeland Security has defended its actions, stating that ICE did not intend to target a child and that procedures were followed. Though details about the incident have been disputed by local officials and the family legal representatives, the judge's decision represents a significant rebuke of federal immigration policy and has intensified public discussion about the role of immigration enforcement and the handling of families and children within the U.S. immigration system. Temitakwai Oluwafemi reporting for Beetv News.
And now to the business news. The Office of the Accountant General of the Federation has disclosed that a total of 2.45 trillion was disbursed to state governments and the Federal Capital Territory between March 2024 and August 2025 as financial support for infrastructure and security projects. The intervention spanning 17 months was designed to strengthen subnational capacity to address widespread insecurity and close major infrastructure gaps across the country. The report.
According to internal OAGF documents submitted at the December 2025 FAAC meeting, the funds were released under a special investment program financed through non-oil revenue savings to ease fiscal pressure on states and speed up project delivery. The records did not indicate how much each state received or whether the funds were separate for monthly allocations. The document shows that total receipts by the federal government during the period matched the total disbursement of 2.45 trillion naira, leaving a zero balance as of August 25, 2025. Of these amounts, 1.184 trillion naira disbursed in 2024 through 4 tranches, 259 billion naira in April, 222 billion naira in May, 370 billion naira in September, and 333 billion naira in December. Petroleum products marketers have argued that the only way to shield Nigerians from the shock of a sudden surge in petrol prices is for the federal government to sell crude oil to the Dangote Petroleum Refinery and other local refineries at subsidized rates. The marketers therefore urge the federal government to sell crude oil to domestic refineries with a subsidy to prevent a sharp increase in petrol prices. Specifically, the Independent Petroleum Market Association of Nigeria appealed to President Bola Tinubu to consider subsidizing crude prices while also extending the Naira for crude deal to other modular refineries operating in the country. The Managing Director of Operation at the World Bank, Anna Beetv, accelerating economic growth and job creation. In a statement issued on Sunday, the World Bank said the visit scheduled for February 1st, 2026 will focus on how the World Bank Group can best support Nigeria's reform agenda, with consultation feeding into its forthcoming country partnership framework for Nigeria. According to the bank, the new strategy places jobs, energy access, and private sector-led growth at the center of Nigeria's development priorities. It said discussions during the visit will gather feedback on improving the enabling environment, unleashing human capital, building resilience, and maximizing private capital. Favor Kolawole reporting for Beetv News.
And now to entertainment news. Nigeria TikToker and live streamer Pella has been left heartbroken after Davido's loss to Tyler at the 2026 Grammy Awards. Notably, the 2026 Grammy Award was hosted by Trevor Noah at the Arena in Los Angeles. The report.
Tyler, the South African singer, took home Best African Music Performance at the 2026 Grammy Awards for Push to Start, beating out top Nigerian artists Burna Boy, Davido, and Ira Star. Some of the major winners included Kendrick Lamar, who took home multiple awards including Best Rap Album for GNX and Record of the Year label for Luther with Caesar. In a now viral video, Pella, who recently quit university, was devastated over Davido's loss to Tyler at the Grammy Awards, calling Kataife a bad luck. In another development, an alleged ex-wife of Mercy Johnson's husband has dragged the actress online, accusing her of knowingly getting involved with a married man and deceiving the public. In a viral video circulating on social media, the woman claimed that Mercy Johnson was fully aware her husband was married at the time they became involved. She further alleged that she was never divorced and was never asked to return her bride price, insisting that the children her ex-husband had were from the union first. She ended her claims by challenging the actress to come out publicly and prove her wrong. The Federal Medical Center, Jabi, Abuja, has issued an official statement addressing widespread social media claims surrounding the death of Miss Ifunanya Lucy Wagene, popularly known as Naya. Naya passed away on January 31st, 2026, after suffering several neurotoxic complications resulting from a snake bite. Her death stirred intense online reaction, with allegations suggesting that the hospital lacked life-saving anti-snake venom at the time she was admitted. In a statement released on February 1st, 2026, FMC Jabi firmly denied the allegation, describing them as false and misleading. According to the hospital management, Naya was attended to immediately upon arrival. Medical personnel reportedly initiated emergency care without delay, including resuscitation, intravenous fluids, intranasal oxygen support, and the administration of polyvalent anti-snake venom. Favor Kolawole reporting for Beetv News.
And that's the end of our global news. Thank you for joining, and join us later at 3 for our news updates. I am Ruth Obodo. Bye for now.
Beetv.